with the gymnosperms, and I don't know, we might even start a little bit on the angiosperms today. So, by the way, the last lab quiz on the syllabus, it's not correct. We're gonna open the lab quiz probably the last Friday of the semester, because you need to be quizzed over the Thursday lab stuff the day before. So we're gonna open it on Friday of the last day and then have it due Wednesday of exam week. Okay. I'll remind you again. I'll make an announcement and all that, but Duncan and I talked about that the other day, and just makes sense that we cover what you did on Thursday. So we're gonna do that, all right? Okay, oh, and then I will open a gymnosperm assignment, and have that available. And it will probably open on either later today or Friday, or I don't know. Does anyone care? Probably Friday, and have it due Wednesday. Okay. So we've been talking about gymnosperms. Definitely the biggest one are the phylum Pinophodon, the conifers that belong in there. Well, 50 genera and many, many, many species. Of the conifers, the Pinus genus has about 90 species, and that's the life cycle that I've been going over with you. Okay, so it's the Pinus life cycle. That's the only one that we're going to go in any detail on. So we've been kind of focusing in on them quite a bit. Let's think about some of the others that are in the gymnosperm category. So the cycads, again, if you looked at this and didn't know, you might think it belongs to the angiosperms. The leaves are very palm-like. The cycads are a very ancient plant, though. They belong into the gymnosperms. There's not a whole lot left, 11 genera. And they truly do look palm-like. So depends on the species or how you maintain them. Like this, I think this is a picture in Florida where they were using cycads as like a living fence between property. So it's very attractive and fairly dense. When you grow it more like a bush-like, there's really no cycads native to areas like here. It's just too cold. And so we're thinking about the tropics and the subtropics. Really, if you talk to a plant biologist, everyone zooms in on how, the age of dinosaurs happened during the Mesozoic era. And plant biologists would say, no, it's the age of cycads. So it was time in the evolutionary history where cycads were very abundant, bigger, but they have since slimmed down over the years. So there's some debate, but the last I read, Zamia pumila, some people call it Zamia integrifolia, is the only cycad native to the United States. It's found in Florida. And that's it. So you have to go to other areas. Most cycads are more tree-like, not so much low bush. So here you're seeing more of the tree-like look, very interesting and exotic looking compared to what we have around here. And so dioecious, do you remember two-ecious? Two houses. So that means there's going to be a male cycad plant and a female cycad plant. We had a male and female, we had two of those, male and female cycads in the greenhouse. Beautiful. They were quite old. They weren't tree-like, unfortunately, but they were in big pots and they were quite tall. They were almost as tall as me. And we had a cold snap. This was back before facilities figured out that the blueprints changed when they built, well, not the blueprints. Someone made a decision, did I tell you this? When the greenhouse was being built, it was supposed to be built with double pane glass, which is much more insulation power. Somebody said, oh, we're running over budget. Oh, let's switch it to single pane. And didn't tell the heating people. Didn't tell me. So the first winter, of course, over the mid-semester break, in December when, I'm not around and I walk in and the temps had plummeted below 40. And a bunch of my plants, not my plants, but a bunch of the greenhouse plants died, including the beautiful cycads. And those cycads were at least 50 years old. I inherited them when I came here. And he told me, the previous botanist said, yeah, these were about 50 years old. So yeah, I literally cried. And then they didn't believe me. I'm like, well, come on over here. The greenhouse is freezing. And they're like trying to blame it on me. I'm like, come over here. And then they come over and they're walking around and like, these are single pane glass. I'm like, okay, well, they're supposed to be double pane. And so they had to double the heat system, essentially, in order to get enough heat pushed into the greenhouse.
Certified building too.
Yeah, I don't know that it is. I don't know, I don't know if this one is.
Or
No,
this
yeah, I don't think this one is.
one. All right.
But yeah, so they sacrificed a little bit of upfront money. But now every year, the heating bill, right? For single pane greenhouse in this area of the country.
Gas is only going up, so.
So I was so short-sighted and the lack of communication was just stunning. So lack of communication, I tell you, that can be the downfall of a lot of big, situations like this where you have to run a university. So anyways, I got sidetracked with that. Sorry. So I had beautiful male and female cycads. So be aware though, if you have, they're commonly sold as houseplants. You can buy them in cute little forms where they're nice and cute, but they can be toxic. So be careful if you have children or pets. That is not something you want near them to chew on. And another interesting thing about them is that if you look in their root system areas, they have a lot of cyanobacteria hanging out. And it seems to be a mutual win-win situation where they just harbor these interesting cyanobacteria. So very exotic looking. I'm guessing that one needed to be propped up. I don't know why that's there, but then I didn't like the way it was growing too. See the peacock? But that was cute.
I was just saying that the whole bushel looks like a peacock, and then the next slide, they're.
Oh, yeah,
They look like peacocks.
yeah, they do when they're out. Yeah. Maybe that's what I was thinking when I put these two subliminally. I was like, huh, interesting. So here, this is the female cone that's developing in the female cycad. And then here you can see the female cone again. And here's the male cone off to the right. So this is the only one that we're aware of where the male cone's bigger than the female cone. And here again, you have the male cone on the left, female next to it, and then on a close-up of the leaves that don't look anything like what you would think of for a gymnosperm, but they're fun to landscape with. This is down in Mexico City. So if you travel in tropical areas, keep your eye out for cycads because they're popular landscape plants. Very pretty, but don't touch, don't chew.
Development in it.
Yeah,
So cool.
yeah, it's an herbarium, so I don't know. I think they covered it kind of like a football stadium
Yeah.
type thing,
Pretty cool.
Yeah, I saw it. I'm like, ooh, I'd like to go there. So when I retire, I want to go to herbariums and botanical gardens across the world. Okay, maidenhair trees. This is another one. You're like, what? This is gymnosperm? You haven't heard that one? Oh. Yeah, the nickname is Maidenhair. So phylum Ginkgo phyta. Ginkgo biloba is the only one left. So it used to be more abundant, but Ginkgo biloba is it. They have fan-shaped leaves. Again, nothing like what you would think of if you say, think of the word gymnosperm. They're quite nicely proportioned. They can be fairly big, but they do grow slow. They drop their leaves in the fall. So again, it's like, it just seems weird. They are popular for landscaping. A lot of cities will landscape with them because the leaves are very pretty and they're fairly resistant to pollution. And if you are a city landscaper, you need to know your ginkgos because they're dioecious. That means there's a male ginkgo and a female ginkgo. The female ginkgos smell horribly when their seeds are ready to be released. I mean, you'd walk by it and just go, oh my gosh. So I know of at least one case where the landscaper didn't know that and bought female. So they had to rip those out. Yes, probably. That fits our city budget. Oh, so if you ever get a landscaping job, be aware. It's actually the smell is bad, but people actually eat the seeds. So if you get past the smell. Yeah, they're very popular in China. They think they're very healthy. And apparently the fishy taste is not bad, but you have to get past the odor. So, yeah.
There are people to make like fermented fish sauce where it's like, if you don't have that sealed up, your neighbors are gonna call the cops.
Yeah,
Is that
it's
bad?
pretty rancid.
I remember there was like two.
It's like a corn flower.
There's an angiosperm where it smells like.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's here in town, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. They're just landscaping trees a lot.
Yeah, because I walk by, I'm like, is there a cat, around? It smells like cat urine.
Also have another bad smell.
Yeah. Yeah, I can't remember the one that smells like cat pee, but it's an angiosperm and it is
But they
landscaping.
make flowers.
Yes.
But
They are pretty, but you go near it to smell the flowers because flowers are very attractive. But if you get too near it and take a sniff, it's like, ooh, a cat was here. Yeah.
But could they use in like fish oil? Like the.
Oh, I don't know. I mean, it's one of the problems if you take fish oil is that
how do you know
well, yeah, I mean, and then, when you burp or whatever, you can retaste the fish, so a lot of people don't like to, I don't know. That's a good question. Yeah, yeah.
it tastes better?
So again, along the street, you can see it's quite majestic looking and a close-up of the fan-shaped leaves. I don't know exactly why they call it the maidenhair. I know.
It's like, that's the sign that.
I know. Right. So the male is on the left there, the pollen cones, and the female on the right. So again, they're pretty simple structures for cones. You can't see anything like you do with the pinus cones that we had been talking about. And they've studied a little bit about how they deliver the eggs. I'm not going to go into it, but they know that they do it a little differently. They get a little bit aggressive with how they absorb nutrition from the megasporangium. So it's a little aggressive. It's interesting how they do that instead of just slowly and nicely putting their pollen tube down. So, all right, the last group, phylum Gnetophyta, 3 living genera. That's it, Needham, Ephedra, and Welwitschia. And again, you look at these and you're like, gymnosperms. Okay, so I'll go through each one. In total, 71 species that we're aware of. None around here. Ephedra, that may ring a distant bell, sound familiar? We'll talk about that. So Needham, let's do that one first. So Needham, again, broad leaves, doesn't look needle-like. Very simple cone structure, so to speak. Doesn't even look like a cone. That's the female cones or ovules, more like it. So 30 species belong to Needham. They hang out in a lot of tropical forests. They are typically vining plants or trees in those areas. But again, they don't look like gymnosperms. They have separate male and female plants, dioecious. So ephedra, often called Mormon tea. So this has a interesting history medicinally. There's about 40 species and just very shrubby, not all that attractive really. The leaves are very small. It's really the branches that are doing the photosynthesis. And depending on the species, they're either saying, you know, both sexes on one plant, monoecious, or separate, male and female. But ephedra has its claim as they were using it as a weight loss drug. This is probably before you were born. And so maybe you don't recognize that word so much from medicinal, but ephedra was a weight loss drug and people started taking it and it worked. However, it caused heart attacks. Yeah, in a significant cohort of the people. And so they banned it. And so you can't find it on the shelves anymore, at least not here in the United States. Who knows on, yeah. So be aware if you go to other countries, it might still be showing up, but I think the way it partly led to weight loss is it was kind of like almost extreme caffeine effects, you know?
Oh.
And so it would, yeah, your heart would race and then cause heart attacks for people who are already, you know, in risk of heart attacks. So, you know, plants produce a lot of chemicals and they're not all safe. So you got to be careful. But, you know, it's just a shrubby looking low to the ground plant. Here are the ovules, essentially the ovulate cones, very simple. Okay, this one is bizarre. So Welwitschia, there's only one, Welwitschia mirabilis that they know of. You have to go to Africa and go to the Namib area. It is amazing in its ability to survive and actually grow in that habitat because it rarely rains, relies on fog coming in off the ocean shoreline for the most part. It really starts out as two huge strappy leaves like that, very long. And then over time, those two leaves get beat up and they start to like strip down the length of them. So they really only have two leaves. And then when you see a tangled mess of them, that's really two leaves that have just been gone through some hard times. There's separate male and female, and I'll show you some pictures of where the cones are, but that's a more mature one, but that's really, I mean, they've done some studies on that. That's two leaves that have just gone through heck, lived a hard life. So, and you just see them kind of sporadically, the videos I've seen, you know, they just kind of are sporadically out there. They're not in huge clumps or anything. And yeah, it's you know, the stem part is barely above the surface, so most of it's underground. And you can see the pollen cones on the left and the female cones on the right. You see that? So the chameleons like to go there because of the insects. They like to hunt and eat. Looks like the female, you see lots of female cones. Okay, yes.
Are there typically like multiple plants like around, like in the same like vicinity or?
The videos I've seen of this area, it seems like they're far, spaced out pretty far from each other.
Football
Yeah,
fields
like-
away.
There is some, thought that chameleons and others, go from Welwitschia, from plant to plant, and they might be carrying pollen. There is some thought to that. I don't know. Well, let me get into this a little bit. So this whole phylum, when you look at some of the species there, they kind of look angiosperm-like. I mean, it's hard to even think they're gymnosperms. Some vessels or vessel-like elements are showing up as in the xylem, and we don't see any archegonia, which we'll learn that's a thing in the angiosperms. They don't have true archegonia like what we've been talking about. So that some of the species don't really have true archegonia. So those two asterisks go to this asterisk where it says probably or independently derived. So for a while, there's a lot of debate that maybe some of the species in this phylum were the ancestors to the angiosperms, and now they're like, no, we think they had an independent process here. So, but anyways, there are, some interesting similarities. And so some of the strobili that we see in some of these species, they look almost more flower-like than true like cones that you're thinking about with gymnosperms. And then this piece of evidence that they found one sperm fertilizes the egg instead of the second sperm dying. You have a second sperm doing something. It doesn't do what the angiosperms do, but it stays alive and does something. And so it's kind of similar to what the angiosperms are going to do that we'll talk about. They also do see insect pollination as a possibility. And with the chameleon idea, they've alluded to that as well. And then, so what they're saying currently in the last debate I read is that the neophytes are of all the gymnosperms, okay? Of all the gymnosperms, the neophytes are the most closely related to the angiosperms, but they're not the precursor. Instead, they had a common ancestor and then they diverged from that, and the angiosperms went off and became angiosperms, and then we have the neophytes. So let's look at that visually. So here are the neophytes, Welwitschia, Needham, and they're trying to show that they had a common ancestor, and then the angiosperms evolved, and the phylum neophytes, okay, Neophyta. So interesting group. So this table is a look at the 4 phyla. So make sure you're memorizing phylum names again, and who belongs into what. It has some nice summary statements here of the xylem. Remember, it's just tracheids except for the neophytes. They're interesting. They're saying, yeah, it looks like vessels, tracheids and vessels. So but yeah, palm-like leaves, fan-shaped leaves. So a lot of interesting qualities that you wouldn't think.
Of mobile sperm, does that mean they have to have the free flow of water? No.
No, they'll have, I'm not gonna get into the life cycles of those, but they have a way of delivering the sperm without water. They do. So we still say the gymnosperms do not need free water. And with the conifers, we tend to focus on the Pinus life cycle. And we definitely do not have motile sperm. Okay. So that's it on the gymnosperms. So remember to spend time when you're studying with the Pinus life cycle and the whole process of how the ovule develops in the female cone. That's a pretty important process. And just the idea that, when when you think about what happens with the bryophytes and the seedless vascular plants, and then you shift over to the gymnosperms, there's some definite differences that we see in the evolution of the gymnosperms and how they live their life and go through their life cycle. Okay, well, now we're into the last topic, really, which is the angiosperms. So I wanted to get into those. There should be a slide set available for that in EduCat. So the flowering plants, hugely successful, largest group of plants on Earth, over 250,000 species. So there's a lot to learn when it comes to the angiosperms. The monster flower is an so that's an angiosperm. You have to go to Borneo, apparently, to go check that one out. Interesting looking. Okay, so, yes. I think
That is
it,
the corpse.
I don't think this one smells good though either, because I think it's fly pollinated. Flies usually don't like what we like.
Smells like rotting.
Yeah, but the corpse flower also smells like rotting flesh. We have a corpse flower or corpse plant in the greenhouse, and every once in a while it blooms. And
Smells
Oh, that's
nasty.
what
yeah, but it's not as bad as like the cat pea tree.
Yeah.
Like you walk in and it's like, well, I don't smell anything, and you have to go right up to it. Yeah, so. All right, seed differences. So we're still with seeds. That hasn't changed. However, now we have seeds encased in some kind of fruit tissue compared to exposed seeds on top of the scale of a cone. All right, so we'll obviously need to talk about flowers and fruits as we work through this. And so let's get into the flower. You will need to know parts of the flower. On the final exam, you'll likely see something like this and you need to label it, okay? So with the male and female, so what you're seeing here is a perfect flower, which means it has both male and female structures in one flower. So typically when you look at a flower, if you're trying to figure out what's what, the center of the flower is usually where you find the female. The center, like, females like to be the center of attention. That's how I remember it. So center of the flower is the female, and then the male is surrounding and protecting the female. So that's how I remember as you work. So I always look at a flower and kind of look in the dead center, and then I work my way out to see if I can tell if it's a perfect flower or not, and then, where is everything? Okay, so the stigma style ovary all taken together is called the carpel or the pistil. Now I'm gonna do it how I remember. If it's useful to you, fine. If not, you might want to figure out a way to memorize this. But stigma is the very top of the female. That's where the pollen will land. And the way I remember stigma is my dad would always tease me and my sister and say, "Oh, you women, you're such an enigma." And an enigma rhymes with stigma. And for some reason that just stuck with me when I was an undergrad. Yeah, that just stuck. So style, well, women have style, right? We're stylish. So the style is the stalk, okay? And then, of course, women have ovaries, so that's kind of obvious. And then pistil, the other reason I remember this is my dad, when he'd get slightly exasperated with me, he'd say, "Oh, you're such a pistil." And I'm a woman, so I'm like, well, pistil, okay, woman part, so so that's how I remembered it. So whatever works for you. So I tend to say pistil rather than carpel just because of the history of how I memorized everything.
Confusing for you.
Yes, right. Yeah, it's a bone part. So, okay. And so the ovary does tend to have more than one ovule. Okay, so here you're seeing 6 ovules inside one ovary. All right, then the male parts. So the anther is where we're going to find the pollen. And the way I remember that is anther is close to the word antler, and male deer have antlers. So that's how I remember that. Filament, this is going to sound weird, but the way I remember filament is my dad would take me fly fishing. and the filament line on a, fishing rod. I don't know why, but that's stuck as a male thing. So, yeah, Phil, the guy's name, yeah, or men is right in the word, right? Filament. So there's a lot of different ways, the sillier you can get, or, whatever. And then stamen is taking them together. And again, men is right in the word. So there's ways to memorize this stuff that isn't too painful if you get silly with it. Okay. It is. Absolutely. Yeah. And if you can make yourself laugh if you're studying, that's a bonus, right? I mean, have fun with it, get silly. I mean, you study so much, make it fun. So the other part I want, well, of course, petals, you need to know the word petal. The other thing is receptacle. That's going to come in play here. So receptacle is right where, the ovary tends to be right there, right on top of the receptacle. And I don't care that you know the word peduncle. It's fun to say, but you don't need to know it. I say peduncle. I've heard people say, what's the other way? Peduncle. Is that? Yeah. Anyways,
I like that.
I like peduncle.
I only ever work.
Okay, it's a funny word.
I was thinking about it.
Sepal, I don't know. I mean, it's important that you understand that when the flower bud is all closed up, it's the sepal that you're staring at. So sepal. All right. This other slide too has flower parts. And sometimes I put this in here because some of the slides in lab maybe are some of the older readings you might see this word gynoecium and then the androecium. So gynoecium, female, gyno is referring to female if you look that up. Andro is referring to male. So sometimes you see that phrase, that word, to refer to the male and female parts. So this taken together, this is a perfect flower. Now, when you look into the ovary, you can get different designs. You do not need to know the different designs here. Okay, don't memorize this. This is just trying to show you there's differences. So there's 250,000 and counting angiosperms. So there's differences out there. So I just wanted you to be aware of that. I'm going to cover one life cycle and just a little bit of another one out of 250,000. So they can but they do use that as a way to classify and better figure out where they fit in relationship to other angiosperms. Okay, this I want you to know. This is looking at where are the ovaries in relationship to the rest of the flower. This has ramifications when they look at the evolutionary age of plants, the angiosperms. So earlier plants, more primitive looking angiosperms, they had superior ovaries where the ovaries are rather exposed. They're up, sitting up, right up on the peduncle or the receptacle. I got that word in my mind now because it's so fun to say. And you can see the other flower parts are attached below the ovary, okay? Then as time goes by, they decided to better protect, I think, the ovary. And so now you can see more of the tissue coming up. It's kind of sunken down, half inferior, and more of evolutionarily advanced plants have really tucked their ovary a little bit more into the flower so that most of the rest of the flower parts are up above. Okay, and they do hypothesize that's a protection mechanism. Okay. Oh, absolutely. Yeah, they'll ask you to look at that if you're IDing. The lab, when you go to lab and start looking at the slides, the prepared slides of the life cycle, I just want to make you aware that it's going to be the lily species, the Lilium, that's the genus name, Lilium. And historically, they picked the lily as a way to show the life cycle, even though it doesn't do the most common life cycle. So it kind of drives me nuts. But they say, well, it's because all the parts of the flower are so big, like the ovary is so big, that it's easy to make slides. It's easy for people to see what's going on. So I just want to caution you. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the lily life cycle, but that's not the main one we're going to focus on. But it does allow for nice slides, I have to say. And so they are. So we'll look at those, and we'll look at lily flowers too in lab. So here is what you'll see in lab. So what we're looking at here is the ovary here, and they took a cross section of the ovary. So the drawing there is showing that you have 6 ovules, okay? 6 ovules inside that ovary. And then under the microscope, you see almost 6. It's a little cut off here, but you see 6 ovules that are needing to develop and be ready for pollination. So there's a blow up. So all of these are the ovules, the lily. You can see they're quite large, easy to see. So let's look at this a little bit. So again, we tend to use the word megagametophyte for this, the female gametophyte. However, a lot of more modern texts have been switching to embryo sac, okay? It's the same thing. So megagametophyte equals embryo sac. Okay. So they actually use the word placenta too, where the ovule attaches. So here you have the megaspore mother cell sitting in there. Hasn't done anything yet. Here again is the megaspore mother cell blown up a little bit. So we have to think about what's going on with that megaspore mother cell. So that megaspore mother cell is going to be going through meiosis. And so now you see those 4 cells resulting from meiosis, 3 die off, and you're left with that functional megaspore. Okay. So that sounds fairly similar to what we talked about with gymnosperms, but now we see. Okay, so a couple things on here before we get going. What you're witnessing in this, is the polygonum type development of the megagametophyte. That's the one I'm gonna ask you to know, the polygonum type embryo sac development or megagametophyte. So this slide is really important, but it's quite simple, really. You see that functional megaspore, it's gonna go through some development, some mitosis, it's gonna grow. But only 3 times. It goes through mitosis 3 times. And then it says, okay, we're done. And so then by the time you're done, you're going to end up with, interestingly, 7 cells, but 8 nuclei. So that's weird. So what happens is that, do I have a better? Okay, so they're showing rounds of mitosis. Now, first mitosis, you get 2, 4, and here's 8. So you think, okay, that should develop into 8 cells, but that doesn't happen. Instead, if you look at the very last image, I'm going to blow that up a little bit. Oh, ugh. Okay. So here, these polar nuclei, they're in 1 cell. And they're trying to show that's a cell right there. So there's 2 nuclei that ended up in 1 cell. Or that central cell. Polar nuclei. Then there's 3 other cells up top here, away from the micropyle. Those are called the antipodal. I think about, they're opposite from the micropyle. Those are antipodal. And then there's 3 cells right by the micropyle. The middle one is the egg, waiting to be fertilized. And the 2 on whoops, the two on the other side are called synergids. You need to know this. Highly likely I'll ask you to label something similar to this on the exam. So this is the embryo sac or the megagametophyte. You don't see the word archegonia there. That's gone away. Yes.
Are there always two polar nuclei?
Yeah. Well, yeah, I'll show you. With the polygonum type, this is what we get with two, yeah. But I'm gonna show you, there are some other strategies that other, besides the polygonum type. But this is the only one I want you to fully know. So at least it's fairly straightforward. You get 3 rounds of mitosis and then we say the cells migrate to give that design to how, to how it looks in that last image. So when we look at it under the microscope, it's not going to look quite this clear cut. So if I do ask you to label something on the final exam, it's probably going to be a drawing that's more idealized because otherwise it's hard. But okay, so you have your antipodal cells away from the microbiome. You have a central cell with 2 polar nuclei. You have an egg and 2 synergids. So that's the megagametophyte or the embryo sac. No archegonia. Okay. All right. So remember, back with the gymnosperms, there was a ton of mitosis going on. Remember I said it's all chaos. It looks messy. So the angiosperms, I'm like, let's simplify. All right. And so they only do very limited rounds of mitosis. Okay, so under the microscope, you're going to see something like this. So this is the developing megagametophyte. And again, we're not going to like, what's this cell? What's that cell? We're not going to do that because it can be hard unless you really study this in depth. But you can see that there's cells forming and, going through their development. And eventually you end up with, this is a fairly decent depiction, but again, I'll show you a drawing if I ask you to label this because this is still challenging. But here they've labeled it. All right, so that's the embryo sac or the megagametophyte. This is more idealized drawing of it. Still talk about an integument, still have that, okay? That didn't change, or an integument that's surrounding the megagametophyte. Still have a micropyle region. This, whoever did this slide prep should have gotten a bonus that day. This is double fertilization occurring. So this is the egg with the sperm nucleus arriving there. So you have fertilization about to happen. This right here, this is the second sperm. It's busy doing something, right? So with the angiosperms, both sperm that get released by the pollen will do something important, okay? So double fertilization is what we refer to this, okay? Even though this isn't really another egg, so it's a little weird. I don't really love it, but double fertilization is trying to get across the point that both sperm do something important. One will fertilize the egg. The other one fuses, the nuclei will fuse with the polar nuclei. So you already had 2 nuclei to begin with in the polar nuclei, or the central cell. Now you add a 3rd one. So that means you're in the triploid state with that central cell getting the sperm nucleus. So triploid, we would say 3N. 3N. So that's weird, but we'll get into that a little bit. So this is after fertilization, and now the embryo is starting to develop. So when you get fertilization, initially it's called a zygote. Then we start talking about embryo once it gets a little further along. So just that new thing right there, that's the baby. Baby's and that embryo developing. There's a little bit more. Okay, so what we just went through is what we call the polygonum type development. Top row, you have 3 rounds of mitosis, migration of the nuclei and cells. But you can see this is just a handful of examples of some other options out there. And Lilium, of course, has to be weird. So Lilium is what you're following in lab, the slide you're looking at. So the reason they're so big is that they end up with 3 nuclei in some of these cells. So the cell has to accommodate that, so they're big. All right, and so it's easy to look at under the microscope. So that's why they picked Lilium all those many years ago. It was just easy. But you can see still, you know, very limited rounds of mitosis, no matter what ones you're looking at here. You see some variations though. So how many nuclei end up in the cells, and then with the polar nuclei, you know, how many are there? So they definitely will look at all that when they're classifying angiosperms. They look to see what's the count of the nuclei in the polar or the central cell. So with Lilium, it's a little weird. Well, first, so polygonum happens in 70%. So it's the dominant type. Okay, so that's why we tend to focus on polygonum. And then there's 30% of the angiosperms that we are aware of that do something different. So here you're seeing, you know, the endosperm with polygonum, it'll be triploid. Because I didn't tell you this yet, but the central cell with the 2 polar nuclei, and then the sperm that joins it. So then it's 3N. That's going to develop into the endosperm in the seed. And so the endosperm could be 3N, as what we see with polygonum, but it could be higher in other options of how the megagametophyte develops. Okay, but so they look at that and classify it. With the polygonum, I'm sorry, with the Lilium, what you see here is the megaspore mother cell going through meiosis. And you see here, all 4 cells are there. You don't have one dying off. And then you see some migration, well, fusion, first of all, and then rounds of mitosis. So cells actually fuse together and then start going through. Well, this one went through mitosis, this fused into one and went through mitosis, and so on and so on. And so you end up with, you know, some of these cells in the megagametophyte are triploid. And then the central cell too. So everything will look really big under the microscope because of that. And the flowers are big too. You know, the flower parts are, the ovary is very big. So this is the process of how the lily does it. And again, just showing that they fuse these cells after they've gone through meiosis. Instead of those dying away, they fuse into one, and then they start going through rounds of mitosis. So you can see the central cell has 4, and then count the sperm in there, so 5. So it's a 5N pentaploid condition. And that's going to develop into the endosperm. So different, but it makes for nice slides. So, but the one you're going to be asked about in lecture is the, this one, polygonum. Okay, so this is the one I want you to know really well. Okay, we're going to stop there, continue on with the angiosperms next time.